everyone. Welcome to the Self-Publishing Tips and Tricks Show, a series designed to give you insight into the world of self-publishing and marketing your books. I'm Shanon, writing under the pen name of SC Huston, and today we're doing a book review for the November 15th episode. I'm here along with contemporary romance and picture book author Emma Bennet, and we're going to informally talk about T. Taylor's book, Seven-Figure Fiction, How to Use Universal Fantasy to Sell Your Books to Anyone, and what we learned for our own author journeys. Now, every week I've been giving some updates about what's going on with me, so there's not a whole lot different other than I'm still doing NaNoWriMo, and I'm having fun writing in my novel. I'm also working on 2 other projects at the same time, but I've been able to hit my goal every day, and I'm pretty happy about that. So that's really all I have that's new to add. So I would now like to introduce you guys to Emma Bennet, who's actually been on our show before in episode 32, when we talked about Atomic Habits by James Clear. She'll also be back next season, where you get to learn more about being a hybrid author, romance writing, and tips for succeeding during NaNoWriMo and social media marketing. I'm really excited for that episode to come out, but first, let me turn my focus over to my guest. So take away, Emma. Tell everyone who you are, anything you'd like to share for others to find out more about you.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on the show again, Shanon. Yeah, I'm Emma Bennet. I'm a UK-based writer. I write contemporary romance. I am writing Regency romance, children's picture books, non-fiction for writers. I'm also a freelance developmental editor and a writing coach, and I have a YouTube channel as well. So I'm pretty busy. I'm working on NaNoWriMo as well this month. I'm having a great time writing my Christmas contemporary romance for next year.
How far have you gotten along in your book? Have you been able to meet your goals every day?
Yeah, I'm not willing to talk about that on this podcast. Thank you. Can we move swiftly along?
I do remember you saying something, I don't know if it was a few days ago, I think it was this past weekend, where you said, yeah, it's not. So
it's not, no. Yeah. No, it has got better. The last couple of days.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Right. All right, well, let's talk about T. Taylor's book, also known as Theodora Taylor under her romance author name. She also does have a pen name where she writes other types of romance books. But in this nonfiction book, Seven-Figure Fiction, How to Use Your Universal Fantasy to Sell Your Books to Anyone, as part of her Universal Fantasy Butter Up Your Writing series. I picked this book for us to read because I did hear the author speak about it on several podcasts, the first being with The Creative Pen by Joanna Penn. I'd like to start with an excerpt, so maybe if you haven't heard of it, here is a little bit about the book. There are only, in my humble opinion, 2 kinds of readers: readers who love your books and readers who don't know they love your books yet. But how do you reach those readers in the second category, no matter what kind of writer you are? The answer to that question is universal fantasy. I wanted to look at, did this book fulfill the premise and the promise that was given in the excerpt in the full blurb? And I would say that she delivers on the premise that universal fantasy is the answer to what has sold her books. She talks about her struggle to figure out why some of her books sold well and why others didn't. And she gives specifics on her discovery. But for the second part of the premise that says, once known, universal fantasy cannot be undiscovered, I'm struggling with that one a little. Maybe I need to do homework, as she prompts several times throughout the book, but I could not confidently say I know how to walk away with this information from this book and know exactly how to look for, find, and or incorporate universal fantasies in my writing. So what about you? Do you think that the book delivered on what it promised in the premise?
I found it a really, really interesting book. I did like the idea, and I think a lot of it makes sense, but the idea that your book is for everybody, that just does not resonate with me. Your book is not tacos. Not everybody is going to love your book. Yes, it's great to be able to reach a wider readership, definitely. And, it's possible that what she suggests will do that, but everybody, no.
Yeah. So behind the scenes, before we started recording here, I just asked him, I was like, what do you think about it? Because I was curious. Because I have conflicting, I have like some parts of me really like it and other parts I'm not really sure. And so we really started talking about it. I was like, oh, this is really good conversation. We should go ahead and just start recording. So I don't know if we'll remember everything we've said, but we have questions that we've picked out, but we can just start by talking about what we thought about the book, if you want to do that.
So I think the first thing that we were saying is that although there is useful information in this book, I felt that there was also a little bit of wasted space, and I completely understand that. As writers ourselves, we want to make sure that we're producing, a good value product. You want your book to be a certain size and to have as much in it as possible. But I kind of feel that what was said could possibly have been said faster.
Yeah. And I look at too, where she didn't actually like answer some of the questions until later in the book. Like, she starts off giving this great background story, that how she got mad when her first book hit the top 100 in the overall Amazon store. And she was mad because she didn't know why that book and not a different one. And she says, until I figured this out. And you don't get that answer for like several chapters later. And I'm like, I would rather have had that up front, then break it down, and then you could have said it again because, reinforce. I used to teach college English and literature, and they say you want to try and say things 3 times if it's very important because that's what helps people remember it. But yeah, I kind of agree that there was a lot there that I wanted to just really know. I think for me, it felt like there was some stuff there that I didn't need to know, only because I wanted to know the answer to things quicker than when she gave them.
Definitely. And I think it was only right near the end of the book that she actually gave kind of a concrete, easy definition of what she means by this universal fantasy. Although she explains throughout the book and gives examples and everything like that, just, you kind of, at the beginning, you want like a 1 or 2 line explanation of what she's actually talking about, because I hadn't heard of this concept before. I've heard of tropes. Of course, I've heard of tropes, but I hadn't heard of universal fantasy before.
Yes, it's kind of almost exactly what I was thinking too. What is universal fantasy? I really need this broken down. And I think that's why when I feel like I'm coming away from the book, I'm not really sure that I could successfully be able to look at my work and say, yeah, there's a universal fantasy right there. And I think it's going to take lots and lots of time. And I've read a lot of the reviews on the book where they said that, people said you have to read this book 2 and 3 times to really kind of get the concepts of it, which in my mind, when we talk about how seems like there's some stuff that could have been maybe removed from the book, maybe that space instead could have been used for giving more examples. And I would have really, really loved examples outside of the romance genre, because everything she gave was romance.
Yeah. So, obviously that's what she writes, that's what she knows. But you can actually, because I was having a little look, and obviously this is part of a series, and you can actually buy one that is specifically for romance. And I was like, well, how is that different? Because as far as I can remember, every single example that she uses, because it's what she writes and because it's what she likes to read, is from romance. So if I was a thriller writer, for example, I don't really think I could get very much from this book other than the concept that there is this thing, universal fantasies, and that I need to use it when I am thinking about writing and marketing my book.
I'm thinking about, we're about like 6 or 7 minutes into the podcast, and we still haven't said what universal fantasies are according to her. We're doing the same thing her book did.
So we're just carrying on with details. It's fine.
Yeah. So let me, I did write it down what she said, what universal fantasies are. And she says, why readers feel things when they read books and why they connect with them and enjoy books. And then she says, because a lot of people say, okay, well, this is just like tropes. And she says, universal fantasy is not a trope. Tropes are built around themes readers understand. And she could tell that a book might be boring when she went to make ads and she couldn't figure out how to sell it except with tropes. But if you don't understand the differences between universal fantasy and tropes, this could be really hard. And so she then further breaks it down. Trope is your stories, what it is. Universal fantasy is your tropes, why it is good.
Yeah. So I guess what I took from it is that, like, putting it into my layman's terms, is that universal fantasies are things that you put into your book that people kind of wish would happen to them in real life. So women kind of wish that a Viking would turn up and run away with them and take them away from their regular humdrum life. People kind of wish that they suddenly get involved in a huge government espionage and they'd become James Bond or whatever. It's kind of tapping into these fantasies that people have and putting them into the books so that they can live the fantasies through your writing, is kind of what I took from it.
Yeah, without actually living it, because like a wife with a family and she works, and so she's at work and she's making decisions. She come home, she makes dinner, she takes care of the kids, so she's making all the decisions. So someone coming around and sweeping her off her feet and taking her away, making all the decisions for her, is a fantasy, because most people probably don't want to give up that control anyways. But it's nice to live it out in a fantasy.
Yeah.
So what you kind of see is just like escapism. That's what a lot of fiction is meant for, is escapism.
Yeah.
I guess we kind of covered that's like the first question has, how effectively does she explain the concept of universal fantasy in the book? And even though she does explain it, she kind of breaks that down, like everything I just said, I still don't have like a firm grasp on it. It still just feels like it's just tropes to me. What is your thought?
Sure. I mean, I liked the analogy that she used with the butter, and that she says that, like with great cooking, you add more butter to make it more flavorsome. So she's kind of adding more of these fantasies into her books, or even if she's not actually adding more, she's picking them out and letting readers know that they're there, so that she can put them in her marketing copy, and so that people know that there's this particular thing that they can expect from her books. But yeah, I kind of agree with you that it's kind of just like a trope to me. Like, you know, people love snowed in trope, or, you know, there's only one bed or whatever. So aren't those kind of fantasies as well? There's definitely a lot of crossover, I think, between those ideas.
Yeah. And I was thinking about, okay, if I made ad copy, right? So I made a little graphic for my latest book where I had all the tropes on there, with my book in the center and had all the arrows, you know, pointing to the book from the tropes. And I was like, so how Beauty and the Beast is actually one of them, because it is kind of on a beauty. And I'm like, what would I do if I was to do a universal fantasy instead of the trope? I would say girl helps guy stop being a beast. I don't know. She makes him over. I don't.
Oh, yeah.
And it feels like it's more words than Beauty and the Beast conveys in all of that right there and then and there, right?
Yeah.
So but she did give examples. I did appreciate that she gave examples of like her ad copy and how, you know, she went from just saying the tropes to pulling it out more. So yeah, I think I would have to read it a couple times to really understand these differences.
Yeah, I thought the ad copy was a really, really good idea as well. Although they could have maybe been a bit bigger as well, because it was quite hard to see the details on the. I feel that that's just not my old lady eyes. I feel that was actually a thing. It could have been a little bit bigger. But yeah, I thought that was a good idea, so that you could actually see how it works. The fact that her big thing is that she kind of works out like the blurb and the ad copy and things before she actually writes the books, so that she's absolutely sure that she's hitting into those universal fantasies that she wants to tap into for that particular book. I thought that was very interesting, and I definitely think that that's something that a lot of writers would struggle with. I definitely would. You know, and like now, you know, the nano project that I'm working on, I think I'm about 9,000 words in. I would not feel happy to write ad copy for it or to write a blurb. I mean, you know, it has actually had a synopsis, because I had to write that to submit it to my publishers to get the book signed. But that's going to change. It kind of seems to me like that's a little bit of a waste of time, because things change. Characters do stuff that you don't expect them to sometimes.
I do feel like a lot of that was written for someone who is more of a planner, which I think that she is kind of a planner. She does do a chapter on how can you do this as not a planner. To me, it still felt like you're still planning a lot, because I'm the same way. I have spent the time developing a character, coming up with their emotional wound, their flaws, what their, you know, leadership style is. I've come up with all this stuff, and it gets thrown out the window when I start writing, because it doesn't fit with the story and what they're actually doing. So
yes, it happens.
Yeah. And she does talk about how universal fantasy can apply to not just a story, but to characters, but she doesn't spend a whole lot of time on that.
No, it was useful the way that she takes the Beauty and the Beast Disney movie and breaks that down with the fantasy. And I thought that was really good, because her writing, she does incredibly well from the sounds of things, but it's not mainstream. So unless you are somebody who reads these particular types of books, you probably won't have heard of her, and you're not going to know some of the books that she's referencing, because the books that she reads are also within the same kind of circles. So I thought that was really handy that she gave an example. Like, everybody's seen Disney's Beauty and the Beast or knows the story. And if you haven't, you can watch it in like an hour and a half, as opposed to not really understanding what she's saying and having to work your way through some of the books that she talks about. So I thought that was a really useful thing to do.
I was reading some of the reviews, and someone did mention how, like, we were talking about this, the bully aspect, because she talks about bully romance and how that's a fantasy, and we were like, you know,
really?
Yeah, and we were talking about how we would write it. In a review I read, I'm remembering this, that they said the other flip coin to that is that when he is trying to bully her is the strong woman fantasy. She doesn't end up to him and doesn't go to dinner when he tells her to.
You know, the fantasies that she's giving are very specific to her genre. I would have really loved to have seen some, you know, from historical fiction, some from sci-fi, some from thrillers, so that you could see how it worked on the big stage, if you like. So for more writers, because I really think that somebody who didn't write romance reading this would be a bit disappointed, because so many of the examples just don't fit anything that they would write and would be in their books, because it's not even like it's just like a romantic subplot that she's talking about, which, you know, there are in many different genres of books. These are very, very specific romances that she's writing, and she's found this amazing niche, and she does so well, but it's not relevant to most authors.
And a lot of the reviews I read did say that they had hoped to have more than just romance. And I would touch on the fantasy part of her title because it has fantasy in there. When I first read the title, I thought it was something to do with fantasy. And I did see some reviews that I thought this was going to be about fantasy. So it is a bit misleading because it's not really about fantasy. It's got the romance. But I agree. I think that if she had other genres in there, even if she didn't write them, if she can pick out Universal Fantasies and other genres, then that would help me to be able to know, oh, okay, this is how you do it. This is how you find this in your writing or put it into your writing, because this is a way to do it. Now, she was on a conference call with a group that I'm part of, like just about a month ago. And she has come up with a romance trope list. And she also has a sci-fi and fantasy trope list as well. And I asked her if she planned on doing too many other ones. And she said no, but I think she just came out with another one. But she had said something about like thriller and horror were not anything that she liked to watch, and she would know nothing about it. So she wouldn't be able to do anything for those. So I would understand that too, if it's something you can't consume.
She does also give examples from some television shows like Grey's Anatomy. So I guess that is outside of romance, and she was showing some of the fantasies from that. And I guess, I mean, I haven't actually seen Grey's Anatomy, but the way that she described it, I could get the points that she was making. So that was outside of romance.
I was gonna say, yeah, because she does talk about how the main character in and I've never seen Grey's Anatomy either, but she talks about how the main character, is trying to live up to her mother's image, and then being able to do that and exceed it. That's a universal fantasy. So yeah, and of course then she talks about Cinderella. I'm reviewing some of the ones that she's gone over. I think Shonda Rhimes, she kind of got her own chapter when she talked about Grey's Anatomy. But yeah, so I mean, there are some that are outside of the romance, but I did feel like a lot of it was romance heavy, which I write fantasy romance. You write romance, so for us, probably not so terrible, having those examples. But I can imagine for someone else that doesn't write romance or even likes romance subplots, they may not find the book valuable enough to continue on. And I do think that if they continue through it, they'll find things that are, those nuggets of gold in there.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting idea. And it is something that I am going to attempt to be at least more aware of when I'm writing. I have, like today when I was writing, for example, after reading this, I was kind of going over in my head and thinking, okay, what am I hitting with this here? I don't know, maybe making a list of them might be helpful to make sure that I'm kind of drawing them out as much as possible.
Same thing. When I finished reading it, I finished reading it yesterday, and I was like, okay, my current book. Do I have anything like this in my current book? So I had the same thing. I thought the same thing. I was like, if I don't, how can I put it in there? But then it really comes down to me understanding what that difference is between trope and universal fantasy, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
So some of the right-to-market fiction books are criticized for being too formulaic. Does this book fall into that trap in your view, or does it offer something different in your opinion?
I wouldn't say I suppose it is a little bit formulaic, but it was a new idea. It was definitely a new concept to me.
Yeah.
I definitely read the whole thing. I didn't feel that I could skim it and that I kind of was just looking to see if there was any new information, because it was a completely new concept to me. Although, obviously it is similar to tropes. And as we say, I'm still not 100% sure of the definite distinction between the two. There was definitely useful information in there. It has to be formulaic to a certain degree, I think, because there are certain ways that non-fiction books are set out. So I guess a little bit formulaic, maybe.
I agree with you. It was a new idea when I've heard it on the podcast, and I thought, wow, that's different. The idea, again, when I first heard it, I thought fantasy. I was like, this is about fantasy. And then when they start talking about it, I was like, well, that's not fantasy. That's something else. And, so yeah, and then reading the book and getting a chance to read it, I felt the same way. It's kind of a new idea. It does feel like it's different from tropes, but that distinction is still very difficult for me to figure out. So what are some key takeaways from the book that you think aspiring writers and publishers should pay attention to in order to enhance their marketing and sales strategies?
I guess it's really thinking about what your readers want from your book and what is going to make them keep reading and want to pick it up, in terms of not just that it's you that's written it, if you're a writer that they've known before, but the particular things that you're drawing out of the story and making the most of, that people fantasize about. The idea, I suppose.
Yeah, I do like the idea, and this is probably just more general than anything, of how she talks about how she did that A/B testing with her ads to see, as she drew out the Universal Fantasies, because it wasn't like Universal Fantasy came to her right off the top of her head when she was trying to figure it out. She was looking at these different things, and then she started applying the label of Universal Fantasies to them. And doing that A/B testing, I think, would really help with trying to figure out your marketing. And then maybe I don't have enough of a backlist, and I don't have enough of a backlist of the same genre for me to really know what it is
Yeah,
that any of my books may actually want. I think it helps that she has a backlist of books.
and yeah, but also, I mean, there are lots of different reasons why books sell and don't sell as well. Like it's not just the content or the cover or anything like that. Like, you know, I think we were talking recently about time of year that the book comes out, obviously the amount of marketing budget that goes into it, because I was thinking like my most successful book that sold a load, was that because my hero was Spanish, so was more kind of exotic than my other heroes? Is that why that happened? Or was it just because I don't know what my publishers did. I don't know how much of a marketing budget that they put behind that. Did they just happen to give it a really good push and it kind of just took off, like some books do and some books don't? Like you just don't know. There's so many variables.
Yeah, I agree. There are so many different variables, and whether you're trad or indie, it's hard to figure out exactly which variable contributed to your success in that moment. I mean, you ever have a point where you're like writing something, you're like, this is going to do well, and you're like, wait, but I'm thinking it's going to do well, so it's going to do terrible.
Yeah, well, my book, Her Perfect Hero, that's my favorite book. I love that book. I'm so proud of it. Absolutely love the hero. I love the story so much. Sold the least well of all of my books. No idea why. Absolutely no idea why. Maybe my readers didn't like the fact that my hero was a dentist. I don't know, but that was kind of part of the fun. And yeah, no idea whatsoever why that one. Was it just luck? What was it? But yeah, it's my favorite. I think it's the best written. I definitely had the most fun writing it, but yeah, just didn't sell as well as the others.
So that makes it hard. How do you pick out Universal Fantasies when you think that you've got a good book and then it doesn't do what it's supposed to do? Yeah, I've got like one book just hanging out that I keep writing on. And I keep thinking, this is a good book. This is a book that people really like, but then I'm like, but this is like so different. I don't know if people would like it. But one day it'll come out. But I have been trying to figure out the Universal Fantasies in that book, and I think there's quite a few. But then I'm like, do I really understand Universal Fantasies enough to know that there's quite a few there? I don't know. Is there anything in the book that you felt like that was unclear or could use more explanation?
Just the like we said before, just the exact difference between trope and universal fantasy. The other thing, though, a little bit was the title, Seven-Figure Fiction. How to use universal fantasy to sell your books to anyone. It's not clear what it's about. You mentioned it, and I looked up the book and read, the description and everything, and then I was kind of like, oh, this looks interesting. Yeah, I'll give this a go. But from the title itself, no idea whatsoever what it was about.
I think the title has 3 parts to it that talk to 3 different things that I maybe felt like they were trying to combine to make one idea, like seven-figure fiction. I think they were trying to say with that, hey, you can make 7 figures with your fiction. That's one idea. That's making like a bunch of money off of writing, which is one part of the book, is that you can make money if you tap into these universal fantasies, but that's not the main idea of the book. The main idea of the book is how to find these universal fantasies and put them into your book so that you can get to that point.
Yeah.
And then you have the universal fantasies, and that almost speaks to the fantasy part of me. And I know it has to other people by just judging off of the reviews who were people who were confused that there was so much romance talk when they thought it was about fantasy as a genre. And then you have other part, which sell your book to sell your stories or however to anyone, which goes into the face of everything that we hear, which is you can't sell your stories to everyone.
Yeah, which I maintain you can't sell your stories to everyone. So is universal fantasy, is that a phrase that this author actually came up with herself, or is it, because I've never heard of it before? Is it kind of she came up with it? Okay, so maybe it's one of the, I mean, once you kind of know what it is, it makes sense, but just looking at it, it's a bit tricky to know. And I think sometimes that can happen when there's somebody who's come up with an idea and has named it and it makes complete sense to them. And when it's explained, it makes complete sense, but it's maybe not completely obvious to an outsider.
Yeah. I think a better title would have been like Universal Fantasies and then colon, and then whatever the subtitle is that would follow the colon would explain something in short terms what the universal fantasy meant to that author.
Yeah.
Even if it was like the difference between escapism and tropes.
Yeah. Or tapping into readers' fantasies to sell more books or whatever. Yeah. That's a terrible example, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, because I think that might have made the universal fantasy part clearer to those who thought this was about fantasy, as a genre. Yeah. And it wouldn't have been confusing with having the other parts in there. But yeah, I agree. That definitely was not very clear. And if I had just seen the title of the book and not had heard her talk about it on a podcast and heard other podcasts, talk about it, I don't think I ever would have picked it up because I wouldn't have understood what the main idea was from the title.
Yeah, sure.
Well, how do you feel now after reading the book? Do you feel ready to be able to mine stories for Universal Fantasy and incorporate them in your writing?
Not completely confident, but it is definitely something that I want to look into more. I think possibly the best way, other than thinking about your own stories, to kind of work on this is to watch movies or TV shows and to try to draw them out from that, because obviously you can watch a movie in a couple of hours, and so it's just a much quicker way to be able to take a story and analyze it in that way. So, and also we watch TV, we watch movies, so it's kind of something that we could do while we're relaxing and claim that we're working.
I would argue as writers, we probably do some of that already. We may not be mining for Universal Fantasies, but we're probably looking for like, oh, this is the big reveal part. This is when they decide to do it, or this is when they get together, or this is how they meet cute, or whatever, I think we're already picking out those things because I know I do it as a writer.
Yeah,
I'm looking.
Definitely.
So if I was to answer this question, do I feel ready to be able to mine stories and incorporate them in my writing? I know I've kind of said it a few times. I don't know if I feel like I totally understand the concept. I feel like it's there, and I do feel like this would have to be a second read for me. But I did write something down from the book that I thought, okay, if I use this, maybe I can figure out what the universal fantasies are, which is, she says, pay attention to sections, actions, and pieces of dialogue that elicit bodily reactions. And she gives a list of bodily reactions of how you might react to something, and figure out the universal why. So I thought, okay, if I'm reading something and I get like the chills, or if I'm reading something and I feel like, oh God, that's gross, there's a reason why behind that. And maybe that has something that goes into the universal fantasy. That's the only thing I could think of from what she had said. And I thought that was maybe helpful for me to figure out what the universal fantasies are.
I mean, something that absolutely terrified me was that she suggests that you shouldn't have a single scene in your book that doesn't contain a universal fantasy. And it was like my entire writing career just flew across my eyes like, oh my goodness, I don't know. There's probably scenes my characters tend to make a lot of tea. I don't think that's a fantasy unless you're really thirsty. I don't know.
And I had the same thing. I was like, what? Wait, I've done this all wrong. This is why.
How?
But she does later on, because I was really stuck on that when she said it. She did later on say, if you can't get it into every chapter, try to get at least a couple times in your book. And I was like, okay, I can manage that one, maybe. Let's figure it out.
Yeah. Small goals.
Yeah. All right. So we have one final question before we wrap up. What is the best tip or trick you learned from her book?
It's kind of contradicting something that I said, and that was about writing kind of a blurb or like ad copy before you write your book. So I wouldn't go as far as she does necessarily, but I do think that being aware of the universal fantasies or the tropes or what will draw your reader in is a really good idea. And that is something that I would definitely consider doing. Okay, so I'm going to write this book. How would I sell it to a reader? Why would a reader want to read this particular book? And I think that's something really useful to try.
I agree with that. That would be really useful to try that out. I think I kind of did that with my last book, but I haven't done it with this one. And maybe that's why I'm struggling with trying to figure out what's good about this book. I don't know. But yeah. So I would say that the best tip or trick I got from this was, which this could actually apply to anything. It doesn't have to necessarily be universal fantasies, but it's in bold, and she has a question. If you were, or you knew a character would post about a scene that you just wrote on social media, do you think people would actually find it boring or interesting? Like, and she gave an example of like, when she saw Beyonce on the stairs somewhere, she posted about it on social media and it had a huge engagement rate. But if she was just saying, I woke up today and I went out for a jog, that's boring. And no one's going to engage with it. So if people on social media would not engage with something a scene or what a character is doing, then why would you put it in your book?
But Shanon, you've got mermaids and dragons in your books, okay? Not all of us have got mermaids and dragons. Sometimes we're working with regular people, and regular people aren't that interesting all the time.
Do you know that I've been thinking about that because I was writing a scene today, actually, for NaNoWriMo, where my mermaid was for the first time looking at this stuff above ground or above the water that she had never seen before, because she'd only been on this one island and that's it. She hadn't actually been in civilization. So she hadn't been in buildings or castles and, and seeing tapestries and all this stuff. And she's like looking around and she's like describing it all. And I'm like, this is boring. I should cut all this out. But I'm like, this is her first time experiencing all this stuff. Should I keep it? I thought, well, I have a critique partner. She'll tell me.
Yeah, like put it in there. It sounds like it needs to be in there. It sounds to me like we need to experience what she's experiencing, and this is like something big change for her, and she would really be kind of looking around, taking it all in. And as a reader, I would consider that. Yeah.
Like her first bath, when her hair's getting washed, she keeps smelling her hair. She's like, this never smelled like this before.
Yeah, it's important, isn't it? Like these little things, to get to know the characters and to experience things with them.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we've had a pretty good rounded discussion on this book, and I'm glad that you said that you would read the book with me, because I thought I'd probably end up doing this one alone.
No, I had a great time. Thank you.
Oh, thank you to my guest, Emma Bennet. I really appreciate the time you took to read the book with me and talk with me today. The links for her are down below, but I'm going to let her go ahead and let everyone know where they can find you, where they can purchase your books.
Thank you. Yes, you can find me on YouTube. All of my books are available on Amazon, most of them on Kindle Unlimited, but they're all available as ebooks and most of them as paperbacks as well.
I kind of keep glossy over this in my mind, but you said that you're working, not now, but I think you've been doing this for a little bit, but I keep forgetting it, is that you're working as a writing coach and an editor. And so is that like on your website where people can find out more information about that too?
No, because I'm not really taking on any more at the moment. I'm still kind of working out exactly. Yeah, I've kind of, yeah.
Okay. We'll be back on November 21st with the next tip or trick of the week. And on December 15th, we won't do our normal book review. Instead, we're bringing back a few of our early guest authors to interview us, the normal hosts of the show, for our final long episode of season 3, although we'll still have a couple more short tip or tricks videos throughout the rest of the year. So stick around for those, and goodbye, everyone.